Did everyone in Pompeii die, or did some of them actually make it out? Was surviving this disaster completely impossible, or did some people find a way? And if they did, how exactly did they manage it? Most people, when they think of Pompeii, picture the casts, the frozen figures, the bodies preserved in ash. And they assume the answer is obvious. No one survived. Everyone died. The mountain took them all. But that assumption is wrong. The archaeological record tells a very different story. One that is, in some ways, more haunting than the story of those who died. Because to understand who survived, you first have to understand exactly what happened to those who did not. And why the difference between living and dying on that night came down not to strength or wealth or courage, but to a single decision made in the dark. Now, let us go very deep into that story. Into the ash layers, the boat chambers, the slave rooms, and the roads out of a city that was dying. Into the decisions that saved lives and the ones that did not. In our first journey to Pompeii, we walked the living city. We stood in the forum beneath the shadow of Vesuvius, ate fried fish from stone counters on the Via dell'Abbondanza, watched the election slogans dry on the walls. We watched the mountain wake up. Today we stay after the screaming stops. For generations, scholars believed the story of AD 79 was a single story. One eruption, one catastrophe, one outcome. Both cities buried, both lost. The evidence tells a far more complex story. It was one volcano and one eruption, but two entirely different sequences of events, two different timelines, and for the people caught inside each city, two entirely different ways of dying. There are 86 plaster casts recovered from Pompeii itself. Each one is a real person, not a reconstruction, not an interpretation. A direct physical impression taken from the cavity left in volcanic ash by a decomposing human body. The plaster fills the void. The void was a person. But those 86 are a fraction. Between 2,000 and 3,000 people died in Pompeii alone. Most were excavated before Fiorelli's 1863 innovation by men with picks who did not understand what the empty spaces meant. Those voids were destroyed before anyone thought to fill them. The 86 we have are survivors of a double catastrophe. First, the eruption, then our own early ignorance. And then there is Herculaneum. Herculaneum was Pompeii's quieter neighbor, smaller, wealthier per capita, built directly on the shoreline at the base of the mountain. A resort town for Rome's upper classes, famous for its libraries, its theaters, its private villas painted floor to ceiling, in colors that still, nearly 2 millennia later, have not faded. For several hours on August 24th, Herculaneum appeared to be surviving the eruption. Almost no pumice fell on it. The streets remained passable. The doors still opened. It was not surviving. It was waiting. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon on August 24th, the eruption began. The first phase was the explosive column. Millions of tons of rock, pumice, and ash ejected upward, forming a cloud that towered 20 miles into the sky. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay, described it rising like a pine tree, a great trunk of material climbing before splitting into branches. He was 17. He kept taking notes. By sheer bad luck, the stratospheric winds were blowing southeast. The debris cloud drifted directly over Pompeii. Over Herculaneum, sitting to the west, almost nothing fell. For the next 11 hours, Pompeii was buried under what volcanologists call the fall deposit first white pumice, then grey, raining down like a violent, darkened snowstorm. The streets filled, doors jammed shut. Rooftops began to collapse under the weight. Those who had not already fled now found the roads almost impassable. Those who left in the first hours, forcing themselves out through the falling stones, through the darkness, had the best chance. It felt like the wrong decision. It was the only one that saved lives. In Herculaneum, these same 11 hours looked entirely different. Most of the population evacuated north toward Naples. Archaeological evidence confirms it. Roads leading away from the city show traffic during the eruption. Jewelry dropped and not retrieved. Abandoned carts. Some stayed. They went to the beach. The beach was the only exit that didn't require pushing through the chaos of the streets. The sea was the way out. But the same wind that had been blowing the debris column over Pompeii was now blowing directly on shore at Herculaneum. The waves were too high. The boats could not launch, and so the people who had come to the shore crowded into the boat chambers, arched stone storage rooms built into the seawall, designed to shelter fishing boats during winter months. The walls were thick. The structure was solid. These chambers had survived every earthquake Herculaneum had ever experienced. They gathered there in the dark, more than 300 of them, as excavations would eventually reveal. Soldiers still in armor, mothers with infants, wealthy women with gold earrings and bracelets found next to men with ankle shackles. People who, in the ordinary world above, would never have occupied the same room. 12 hours after the eruption began, at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, the ash column collapsed. When the column collapses, the physics change completely. Everything that had been blasting upward now has nowhere to go, but outward and down a dense, turbulent current of superheated rock, ash and gas, rolling over itself, accelerating down the mountain at over 100 miles per hour. This is a pyroclastic flow. It is not survivable. It moves faster than a horse can gallop. It cannot be outrun. The volcanic layers preserved at Pompeii show not one pyroclastic flow, but 6 a sequence of collapses unfolding across the remaining hours of the eruption, each depositing its own distinct layer in the rock record, readable today like pages in a book. The first 2 flows went northwest toward Herculaneum. They did not reach Pompeii. The first surge hit Herculaneum's city streets at around 1 o'clock in the morning, killing the small number of people still inside buildings. It continued to the beach. The temperature of the surge when it reached the boat chambers was approximately 500 degrees Celsius. The people sheltering in those chambers had been waiting for hours. They were, almost certainly, still alive when the surge arrived. They died in a fraction of a second. Physical anthropologist Pier Paolo Petrone, excavating the boat chambers in the 1990s, found something that overturned the prevailing theory that victims had died from suffocation. Inside the skulls, there was a reddish-brown mineral residue. The brain tissue had not decomposed. It had boiled instantaneously, and the skulls had exploded from the sudden pressure of superheated steam. In some cases, the brain matter had vitrified, turned to a glassy black substance, and been preserved in the cranial cavity for 1,900 years. Over in Pompeii, during those same early morning hours, the pumice fall was beginning to ease. For a brief period, the sky grew slightly less dark. Some people who had been sheltering may have believed the worst was over. It was not over. The 3rd, Fourth and fifth flows came next. It was the third flow, cooler, having travelled further, that finally reached Pompeii. Before we reach Pompeii's final hours, we need to go to a room found not in the city, but in a villa just outside its walls. In 2017, excavations at the Villa Civita Giuliana, a suburban estate partially looted by tomb raiders working through illegal tunnels, uncovered something that led archaeologist Gabriel Zuchtriegel described as the most moving discovery of his career. Not the magnificent ceremonial chariot found nearby, not the gold and silver decorations, a room with bare walls and packed earth floors just next to the stables. Inside, 3 beds, simple beds, one slightly smaller than the other 2, a child. The room also contained amphoras, parts of a horse bridle, materials linked to the chariot outside the door. It was a workplace and a bedroom simultaneously, the entire world of the people who worked there. Around 1/3 of Pompeii's population was enslaved. This cramped, windowless space next to the horses was their home. These are the invisible people of the Roman period. They appear in no census that recorded them as individuals. They exist in the historical record only as property numbers, categories, economic units tallied in ledgers that listed them alongside livestock and furniture. The eruption gave them something Rome never did: physical presence. Nearby, in the same excavation season, archaeologists also found a shrine decorated with a painted snake, Alaris, a household protective spirit. The objects around it had no monetary value: small carved figurines, personal tokens. They had been kept with obvious care. Someone had arranged them deliberately. Someone had stood in front of that painted snake and asked it for something. When excavations continued in the villa itself, 2 victims were found in the cryptoporticus, an underground passage having descended to the lowest point of the building to shelter. The underground passage provided no protection. When excavations continued in the villa itself, 2 victims were found in the cryptoporticus, an underground passage having descended to the lowest point of the building to shelter. The underground passage provided no protection. There is a place in Pompeii that does not appear in most guidebooks. Near the amphitheatre, not far from the city's eastern gate. It is called the Garden of the Fugitives. In 1961, excavators found cavities in the ash layer of an ordinary suburban garden. Fiorelli's technique had long since become standard. They poured plaster. 13 people emerged. A family, or what appears to have been a family caught in the open, attempting to reach the eastern gate. They had made it out of a house. They had made it into the street. They were almost at the gate. Adults and children together, moving through the darkened city under a sky that had not been visible for hours. The smallest cast is a child of approximately 4 years old, on its back, arms slightly raised, a posture forensic analysts describe as consistent with someone who has fallen and cannot rise. The adults were not found in an embrace. They were found in the positions of people who were still moving, still trying, and simply ran out of time. The surge that reached the garden was the third flow cooler than the first 2, having traveled further from the mountain. Still lethal, but not instantaneous. The bodies show the pugilistic pose, limbs drawn inward, muscles contracted from heat. They were alive, briefly, in the heat. The casts are displayed in situ today, under a protective roof. Most visitors who come here go quiet. The rest of Pompeii is the silence of an empty city. This garden is the silence of a specific moment that has not yet ended. Here is the detail that took decades to understand. The bodies at Pompeii and Herculaneum do not look the same. In Pompeii, victims decomposed slowly inside the volcanic ash, leaving hollow voids that Fiorelli filled with plaster. The flesh disappeared gradually over centuries. The bones were preserved inside the cast. When researchers X-ray the plaster casts today, the skeletons are still there. In Herculaneum, there are no plaster casts. There are only bones. At 500 degrees Celsius, soft tissue does not decompose. It vaporizes instantly. The heat left no cavity, no void, no gradual absence. It left only skeleton. The Pompeii victims, struck by a cooler surge arriving later, show the pugilistic pose, a death that was fast, but not instantaneous. The Herculaneum victims show none of this. Their bones are scattered. Their flesh disappeared before their bodies could hold any shape. This is what the six flows tell us. Survival was not about bravery or wealth or divine favor. It was about wind direction and the hour you decided to leave. 2 miles and 12 hours were the difference between the plaster cast and the empty bones, between a shape preserved in ash and no shape at all. There is a question archaeology eventually forces on everyone who studies Pompeii long enough. Not the historical questions, not the questions about pyroclastic temperatures or bone chemistry. The question is this: what do we owe the people we cannot name? The man in chamber 10 with the ankle ring had a name. He had a language he thought in. He had a place he came from somewhere in the Mediterranean, or the Middle East, or Central Europe, and he had been taken from it, brought to Herculaneum by force, and set to work doing things he did not choose to do. He made it to the beach. He found what seemed like shelter. He died waiting for a boat that couldn't sail. The child in the small bed at Villa Civita Giuliana had a name too. Had, in all likelihood, never known anything other than the world of that stable adjacent room, the smell of horses, the weight of amphoras, a space most visitors to the villa would have walked past without a second glance. Fiorelli understood something when he told his workers to stop. He understood that the emptiness was not nothing, that the shape of an absence is itself a form of presence, that history is not only what the powerful left behind, but what ordinary people and powerless people could not take with them. The casts are not interpretations, not reconstructions, just the shape, just the truth of the last moment. And there is something in that involuntary honesty, that complete absence of choice about how to be remembered, that no monument ever commissioned by the powerful has achieved. We began today in chamber 10, an ankle ring, a man of 35, a room that once faced the sea. He had made it to the beach. He had found shelter. By any reasonable calculation, he had done everything right. The boat chambers had survived every earthquake Herculaneum had ever known. He had no framework for understanding that what was coming was not an earthquake. 12 hours after the eruption began, the surge arrived. He did not feel it. He had no time. The ankle ring, the 3 beds, the key held in a fist in the house of Menander that never let go. If today were your last ordinary day, the bread in the oven, the message unsent, what shape would the ash preserve? Pompeii has been asking this question for 1,900 years. It has not yet received an answer it finds satisfying. Together, we keep history reborn. I will see you in the next era.